Now in Zero Block 30, we're privileged to have one of the people that I've said, I believe it was about a year ago, I gave my top 10 list of people that I wanted on the show at some point, and Sebastian Junger was one of those people. Now he is finally on the show. He's got a new book coming out, which the premise is unbelievable, where you and some of your buddies, a couple of your pals, decided just to go up railroad tracks. How did you decide to do this? Where did it come from? Did it just pop in your brain because you were bored during the pandemic, or where did it come from?
Yeah, it's a good question. Yeah. So my book's called Freedom, and I wanted to write about the concept of freedom and how we attain it. And long before that idea came to my head, I had decided with my friend and colleague, Tim Hetherington, who I shot Restrepo with, a documentary about American troops in combat.
Probably, I would say, the most realistic combat documentary that there's been in the war on terror. It's fantastic. If you haven't seen that, you need to check it out.
Thank you. Well, we were going to DC to try to sell our film to National Geographic. They eventually ended up buying it. And on the way down on the Amtrak, I was staring out the window the whole time, and I said to Tim, I said, there's a way to walk this entire thing, like along the tracks. Like there's dirt bike trails and maintenance roads and cornfields and junkyards and, whatever. Like there's, you could do it. We could walk from DC to Pittsburgh, from DC to New York. And before we had a chance to do that together, he was killed in Libya, covering the Libyan civil war. And I just thought I still want to do that. And I found a journalist who was with Tim when he died. He was holding his hand actually in the back of a Rebel pickup truck they'd loaded him into. And a Spanish journalist named Guillermo Cervera, who's an amazing photographer. And then a couple of combat vets from out at Restrepo who were out of the service. And I said, listen, let's just start walking. And the interesting thing about railroad lines, as opposed to the Appalachian Trail or a bike path or whatever, is that it's no man's land. I mean, you can sleep. There's homeless people there. You can sleep there. There's no cops really. There's no like floodlights or surveillance cameras. You can, whatever. It's just, it's not wilderness, but it's not society either. It's some weird blend. And that was very appealing to us. And of course, it's totally illegal. And we had to avoid the cops the whole time. There are railroad police that you do have to figure out how to avoid, but otherwise it's pretty uncontrolled. And we just started walking. We got to Philadelphia and turned west and headed for Pittsburgh. We walked we did multiple trips over the course of a year. We walked in every different season, and we wound up outside of a small town called Connellsville outside Pittsburgh.
That is, I mean, doing it several times too is just something that most people wouldn't want to do. Every time I hear of the old railroads, I think of the song that Randy Travis covered, like "The King of the Road," where you're just out there and you just imagine like an old school hobo where you're just going down the railroad track and seeing things. Looking back, was there ever times in that where you were nervous about your safety between some of the people that you came across?
Oh, we were nervous about our safety all the time. These are active railroad lines, and there's all kinds of things that can kill you out there. Some strapping can come loose from a load of timber on a flatbed car and cut you in half. There's all kinds of things that can happen. And then there was some interesting characters out there. One guy, we came across. One guy had a gun. I don't know. It was a complicated situation, but he had a gun in his back pocket, and it was he felt very threatened by us, which is never good if you're not armed and he is. You know what I mean?
Right.
So and then another time, someone just started shooting at us. It was a lot of gunfire in Pennsylvania. I mean, all the time. It sounded like a sort of low-grade insurgency most of the time. Mm-hmm. And we were walking up the Juniata River along the railroad lines. And, one time someone cracked about 5 rounds over our head. And, we'd all been in combat, and we all had the predictable reaction to that. But it was okay. It was all right.
And I think one thing that's interesting about your story is like doing things like this. And it's been very varied. And I was reading some articles about you, but you've been called the next Hemingway and things like that because of some of the books that you've written, like A Perfect Storm. But I always find it interesting to talk to an author who has a book that really catches on with a certain segment of society, like veterans or military members, like Tribe did. Looking back now, because that book was published in 2016, do you Do you see anything now that would make any of your thoughts for Tribe any different?
Everything that I've done since I wrote Tribe has reinforced my feelings that, the essential message of that book is correct, that humans are social primates. We desperately need community. Most of us are prepared to put the welfare of the group ahead of our own personal welfare. And when you ask people to do that during a hurricane or a tornado, or put them in a platoon and send them into combat, when you ask people to do that, not only will they do it, they will look back on those days as the most meaningful of their lives. In other words, people want to be in service to their group. They actively want to be, and it makes them feel good. Admissions to psych wards went down in London during the Blitz. They didn't go up, they went down, because people felt that their society needed them, and that buffered individuals from their own psychological demons. It's interesting to note that a lot of vets do not have suicidal ideation or depression in active combat. Those things typically beset them when they come home, and they're actually not in those difficult circumstances. You could almost argue that they missed those circumstances.
And do you ever think of, like, with the political process of how it is in the United States now, that people rely too much on their tribe, what the tribal thought process in Republican Democrat circles, both, that they become too reliant on that tribe?
Well, here's the thing. The affiliation of tribe has kept humans alive for a very long time. And sometimes it's unfair, the us versus them, but that kind of mentality is it keeps groups safe. The problem right now is that because of certain kinds of political rhetoric, people are literally thinking that their political party is their ultimate affiliation, that their affiliation isn't to this great nation, it's to the political party that they happen to belong to. So at that point, when you see it break down like that, my father grew up in Europe. He grew up in Spain before the Civil War in 1936, and he fled when the fascists came in. He fled. He was 9 years old, and he and his family fled. But I started looking into what happened in Spain in 1936, and it is exactly what has happened in this country, in the sense that one political party, in this case it was the fascists in Spain, decided that the election that they lost was illegitimate, and that they would simply right that wrong with force. And unfortunately, the military was also on their side. In this country, it wasn't. But the idea that your party is more important than your nation, that will kill democracy. And I do hope that we right our course from that, because we're headed away from democracy, not towards it. And that's what thousands of American servicemen and women have fought and died for, is to preserve our democracy. What a pity to lose that.
No, I completely agree. And I think your path has been very interesting. You said that your father fled and came here because they suspected part of your family to be Jewish, and they needed to leave because World War II was about to kick off, and they needed to get the fuck out of there, which is a smart move on your family's part, no doubt about it. So when you are going through school, your dad's very accomplished, was a physicist, your mother was an artist, and now you are a writer. How do you end up writing the types of things that you do? Like, was it almost like a slippery slope of combat? I can't imagine most people wake up and they're like, I want to go put myself in with combat troops, around combat constantly, and film this documentary that is in an incredibly dangerous place on Earth, probably the most dangerous place on Earth at the time.
Well, I throughout my 20s, I was trying to make a living as a freelance writer. It wasn't really working. And I wound up getting an amazing job as a climber for tree companies. So I was an arborist, and I had worked 60, 70, 80, maybe 100 feet in the air with a chainsaw on a rope, taking trees down in sections. It was very dangerous work.
And it doesn't sound like it. If you say arborist, it doesn't sound dangerous. But then when you say what you actually do, It does sound dangerous.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. You're not pruning apple trees, right? I mean, what the kinds of work that I was doing, sometimes we're very high up, and you're hanging on a rope like a rock climber. You're hanging on a rope, but you also have a chainsaw, and you're taking off huge sections of tree over your head. And if they go the wrong way, they can crush you.
And there's really, I mean, you can learn how to do it, but there is really nature's unpredictable. You think you're cutting it correctly, and there might be a knot in the middle. It makes it go a completely different direction.
Well, yeah. I mean, the thing about it is the knot won't affect you that much. A hollow, like a hollow section in a tree is can be really deadly. That's very rare. Mostly the risks are controllable. And if you get hurt, and I did get hurt, you get hurt it's because you made a mistake. That's not true of combat. That's not true of driving.
Oh, I disagree. I'm a Purple Heart recipient. I didn't duck going below a window. So
okay, but you can also get hurt. You can also get hurt completely randomly, right? I mean, there was people standing right next to my friend Tim, who didn't get killed. He just happened to catch a piece of shrapnel the size of a quarter in his groin. That's it, and it happened to hit his femoral, right? Anyway, there's a random element to combat, which is terrifying. In tree work, all the risks are basically sort of within your control. And if you don't make a mistake, you're going to go home at the end of the day. If you do make a mistake, like I did, you might cut your leg with a chainsaw or whatever. So, but at any rate, I did get hurt, and it made me think about dangerous work and how this nation relies on people doing very, very dangerous jobs, drilling for oil, logging, commercial fishing. It's mostly young men, and it's almost exclusively working class young men, right? So I just thought maybe I'll, as I was recuperating from this wound in my leg, I thought maybe I'll write a book about dangerous jobs. And I was living in the town of Gloucester, Massachusetts, and right around then a huge storm hit, and a local sword fishing boat named the Andrea Gale was sunk out at sea. And I thought, okay, I'm living here. I saw that storm. I know people in town. I'm going to write about the Andrea Gale as an example of dangerous jobs. And so my first book was The Perfect Storm. And it was, that was different from my war reporting, but it got me going into this idea of dangerous work. And war reporting was another dangerous job I was interested in. And that put me in Bosnia in 1993 during the Civil War. And I really loved war reporting. And eventually, I was in Afghanistan in 96, documenting the Taliban's takeover of Afghanistan. And then I was back in 2000 with Ahmad Shah Massoud in Badakhshan as he fought the Taliban. And then eventually I was with American soldiers in 05 and 07 as they fought the Taliban and Al-Qaeda.
What's the difference of being a war reporter embedded with American soldiers versus being embedded with foreign fighters?
Well, it depends. Not much. I mean, there's a sort of paperwork process you kind of have to go through with the U.S. military. I was covered a bunch of civil wars in West Africa, and I mean, you have to get some piece of paper stamped at the Ministry of Information, whatever. But basically, it's a pretty disorganized process. And as a result, in some of those civil wars in West Africa, I not only was I afraid of getting shot by the people that my side was fighting, I didn't trust the people I was with either. Right. And it was just a very, very chaotic situation. The combatants were often very young, like 13, 14 years old. A lot of them were deeply traumatized by the war. Now they had an AK in their hands, and a lot of them were on drugs or very, very drunk. And so that, you go through a checkpoint of drunk soldiers or high on meth, and are 14 years old. That's terrifying, right? There's nothing like that with the U.S. military. Right?
I've seen people like in Afghanistan, they've come across marijuana fields and things like that, heard stories, but meth at a checkpoint is a whole different ballgame.
Yeah, it was, all kinds of craziness that they were doing. And I was in Liberia during the Civil War, and those, by the end of the day, those kids were whacked out. And those were supposedly the guys that I was with, right? But they were terrifying. And so, with the American military, once you're with them, you may catch a bullet, but and if you do, they will take care of you as if you were a soldier, right? You get shot in Liberia, you might be getting shot by the guys you're with because they decided they didn't like you, and they're not taking, you're really on your own. You're completely on your own. And that's very, very frightening.
Yeah, and there's stories that pop up about that all the time, where people are trying to go report and do the right thing, and the next thing you know, they end up captured, and they're captured for a long time, whether it be in Iran or Syria or wherever. I always find it interesting to talk to journalists who spend a lot of time in combat zones of what your relationship was like in the growing process and how you grow that trust. Because I know for me, whenever we would have a journalist that would be embedded with us, there is that period of time where you don't know this person. You don't know what angle they're going to take in their story. You don't know if they're pro-war, anti-war, pro-military, anti-military. So you're very guarded on the things that you say and the things that you do around them. For somebody in your position trying to make a film like Restrepo, which relies on having the guys open up, how did you approach that? Was it a slow process, or did you kind of lay your cards out on the table?
We just kept going back. Tim and I just kept going back. So we each did 5 trips, sometimes together, sometimes apart. Um, it's like going to a new high school. Whatever.
Mhm.
You slowly get to know people, and if you give them reasons to like you and trust you, eventually they will. And but definitely the first day, and the first day at school, you don't know where to sit in the cafeteria for
Right.
sure. I mean, there's definitely
Right.
that aspect to it. But also, we were shooting a lot of video. The first big firefight we were in. I'd shot it all on video. Tim wasn't part of the project yet, and he started in on the next trip. But I showed the guys that I was with the video that I'd shot, and they hadn't really seen themselves in action, and they were able to pick out the firing positions, the positions on the opposite hillside that they were taking fire from. They were able to pick those out, so they sort of knew in the future, oh, that's where those are. By looking at the video, they could sort of tell, oh, that's where they were shooting at us from, and so there was some utility there for them, and we just kept showing up, and I published a first article for Vanity Fair that was entirely reportorial. It didn't judge, it didn't evaluate, it didn't do anything but describe what life was like at that outpost, and I think they really appreciated the directness and the complete lack of any bias or even opinion about any of this. And that helped a lot.
Which is incredibly rare in writing now to do that. And obviously you formed some long-lasting relationships in order to have some of these people from Restrepo join you in the process of making your new book in Freedom. When you reached out to those soldiers that you wanted to come along with you, I imagine, like for me, for example, there is certain aspects that about war that I'm glad that I'll never experience again. Like I just don't want to go back. Some of it really sucked and it was really painful. It was a lot of counseling to get through a lot of that stuff. But there is an aspect of people that you're with in moments like that is irreplaceable. So I would imagine some of the soldiers that you brought with this on your new journey were very excited to have a new source of excitement almost to go through.
Yeah, I mean, the way I pitched it was, look, we're going to be high speed vagrants. We're going to have to dodge the police. We're going to have to carry all our gear. We'll be not quite surviving off the land, but making our way through a semi-urban, semi-developed, semi-wild environment where you're going to have to use all the skills, the same kinds of skills that you had in combat to keep yourself maybe not safe, but out of jail for 400 miles. And that definitely lit them up a bit. That idea, the idea of that kind of challenge. And I think on some other level, the idea that you're with a small group of people, 4 guys having to rely on each other and do everything together outside of the sort of social world that everyone's struggling in. I think that was also very appealing. And so, and these were 2 guys that I was already fairly close to. And so off we went. And, it was different. The trip ended up being different than I'd conceived of it, as all things are. But it really was one of the most profound, important things that I've done. And a couple of these other of these guys also said that about it. It was an extraordinary trip.
And when you have something like this that you're kind of playing around with, and I imagine you have almost those aha moments where it pops into your brain, you're like, let's do this. Like you described going on a train. From the point that you're on the train looking out and you have your initial conversations to the actual conducting of what you're trying to do, what does that process look like for you? Is it a quick thing where you're like, I need to do this and I need to do it now while the idea is hot?
No, I mean, I had the idea in '08 when we were still making Restrepo. So we weren't going to do anything until we'd finished Restrepo and had finished all the promotion. Restrepo was nominated for an Oscar. Tim and I wound up on the red carpet out in LA in February of 2011. A few weeks later, we were going to go on assignment to cover the Libyan civil war. The Arab Spring was at sort of full boil. We're journalists. I mean, the U.S. wasn't involved in anything, but we wanted to cover it. The last minute I couldn't go, so Tim went on his own, and he got himself killed. And so after that, in the sort of rubble and aftermath, the psychological, the emotional rubble, the aftermath for me of his death, I sort of resurrected that idea, and I was like, I won't do it with Tim. I'll do it because of Tim, right? And I said, I just need a timeout. You know, my life was changing. You know, my personal life was changing pretty significantly. You know, my marriage was ending, and I had some things to sort out. And there's no better way to sort things out than by walking a long way with a heavy load.
Yeah, that's true, because you eventually forget all the other things, and the only thing you can care about is that heavy load. Like, so it does kind of move it all naturally. I think your story is fascinating. What's next for you? Because this process has been for a while. You've had your documentary is in the rearview mirror for the most part now. What do you have working on the boilerplate?
Well, you know, but most of my books have been about something that happened. So the Perfect Storm was about a storm and a boat that sank. A Death in Belmont was about a murder in the early 1960s that connected to my family. War, of course, was about a deployment. The last two books, Tribe and Freedom, are about an idea. So in Freedom, I realized that the freest I'd ever been was on this patrol. Like, and as I say in the book, most nights we were the only people who knew where we were. That's a very profound form of freedom. But also I wanted to inquire what allows humans to be free. And basically that means, how do you remain autonomous from somebody or a group that's more powerful than you are? If you're the most powerful group, freedom's a non-issue, right? But how do you maintain your freedom in the face of a person or a group that's more powerful than you are? And humans are able to do that. Other species really are not. If you're the alpha male in chimpanzee society, you pretty much run the show. With humans, that's not true. And I wanted to figure out why. And I sort of divided. I am getting to your question, but I feel like I had to sort of like.
No, it's fascinating. I took some anthropology courses in school too, and I love this.
Okay, good. So I will get to the next project. But basically, for freedom, I narrowed down the things you can do to maintain your autonomy in the face of a more powerful adversary. I narrowed them down to three things. You can outrun your oppressor. If you can't outrun your oppressor, you can try to outfight him. And if you can't outfight him, you're going to have to outthink him. So the book is divided into run, fight, and think. And I mean those things very literally. Like, one of the reasons that Taliban were, I wouldn't say they defeated America, but they certainly failed to lose to America. One of the reasons is they're so mobile, right? Like, they don't have tanks, they don't have aircraft, Air Force, they don't have artillery. They just really moved around, like, right?
And they're the Afghanistan version of the Minutemen.
Yeah, exactly. So the interesting thing, whether you're on a individual level, like a small guy fighting a large guy, I mean, obviously size and strength can dominate, but they also come with a downside. And the downside is that if you're bigger and stronger, be it an army or an individual, if you're bigger and stronger, you're generally slower. You're slower to react, and you use more energy. So a guy who weighs 260 pounds fighting a guy who weighs 200 pounds, if he doesn't win in the first few minutes, he's smoked, right? And so the whole strategy of the smaller person, and this is in MMA, it's on the battlefields of Afghanistan, it's the Montenegrins fighting the Ottoman Empire in the 1600s. Doesn't matter. If you're the small guy, you just have to avoid losing for long enough until the big guy has run out of steam. And that will happen.
You see that quickly in pride fighting. I mean, back in the day, I used to be a huge pride fighter. Bob Sapp was this monster of a man, and he fought a guy that was just a Muay Thai fighter, weighed like 180 pounds versus Bob Sapp's 320. And all he would come in and do pop shots to Bob Sapp's thigh. Eventually, Bob Sapp, he just went on the ground and started tapping out because he couldn't handle it anymore.
Right. So I looked at MMA. I mean, there's all kinds of martial arts that are basically substitutes for a street corner fist fight, which is hard to study because they happen very randomly. But you can look at martial arts. And a statistician for ESPN sort of delved into the numbers for me, and he said that the larger adversary in an MMA fight win 50% of the time, right? So being larger and stronger is not a predictor of who's going to win. That's true for humans. It's really not true for other animals. The biggest chimp will beat up smaller chimps. In fact, it's so clear what the outcome is going to be that all it takes for a larger chimp to win a face-off is to do a kind of dominance display, and the smaller chimp is like, I don't want any piece of this. And but with humans, and the smaller person or the smaller group can sometimes win, and that means that small groups or small people can negotiate for their freedom with a more powerful entity, and that means that the empire does not always win. It means that the American insurgents in 1776 can defeat the British Empire. It's amazing, right? We won. We did it. And so, but eventually you're in a society, America of the 20th century, where it's a democracy, but there's some real holes in it, right? Like the labor laws were, I mean, there were no labor laws. There was a widespread exploitation of the labor force, and in ways that we would find absolutely appalling right now.
Children smoking cigarettes outside of coal mines and things like that.
Exactly. I mean, the mortality rate for infants in the labor force communities, like around the textile mills in Massachusetts, it chokes me up to say it. I mean, I have 2 young children. The mortality rate for young children in those groups was 1 in 5 infants died. That's how bad the conditions were. And this is where you get, outthinking your opponent. I mean, of course, these are, you're a bunch of immigrant laborers in a textile mill. They're not more powerful than the Massachusetts National Guard and the U.S. government, but eventually they won. They won their fight and they got better conditions, and they did it partly by outthinking their adversaries and by using women. They enlisted women in the movement, and as soon as you put women in a front line, I mean, literally in a front line in a street rally, the police are way more hesitant to use deadly force, and they will do it, but they're way more hesitant to, and the political repercussions are enormous. And
too, realistically, that's the reason why we send out pamphlets like "Women and children, please leave." Like, we don't want any part of that. That's the reason why rules of engagement will say military age males. Like, you don't want to be the one on TV that's taking out an elderly man that, even if he has a suicide vest on, you don't want any of that stuff like coming out.
Right, exactly. And if you do just start massacre, had the Massachusetts National Guard just mowed down all the women in the mill strikes in Lawrence, I mean, they're happy to beat up the guys, but if they turn their bayonets on the women, and they had fixed bayonets, the outcry would have been enormous, right? I mean, the government would have lost the fight right there, right? So what the labor movement did, what the strikers did, was put women on the front line. And one police captain said, in frustration, he said, and this really says it all, he said, one good cop can handle 10 men, but it takes 10 cops to handle one woman. And so that's at that level.
My wife.
Right. At that level of strategic thinking, a underpowered social movement or labor movement can actually be victorious against, at the time, quite an oppressive system. And so at any rate, that's the sort of synopsis of my book, Freedom, interwoven with this bizarre trip that we took along the railroad lines. My next project, I had the fortune or good fortune, and I'm still not sure which it is, of almost dying last summer, having dodged plenty of bullets overseas. I had an undiagnosed aneurysm in my pancreatic artery, and symptomless. It had been there for decades, not related to anything, and out of the blue, it ruptured with no warning. It ruptured one beautiful June afternoon. I was in Massachusetts in a sort of remote area, and I basically bled out. I lost 90% of my blood into my abdomen. And
wow.
It took them an hour and a half to get me to the hospital. And, by then I was in this sort of twilight zone between life and death. And I have fairly distinct memories from those moments, including my dead father appearing and trying to console me. And I was getting pulled into a black hole that I didn't want to go into. And he popped up and started to console me. And the last thing I said to the doctor was, "You guys got to hurry. You're losing me right now." And they managed to save me. They put 10 units of blood into me. They found the leak, eventually found the leak. They saved me, but barely. And I want to I'm going to write a book called Pulse about, basically what it is that keeps us alive, and what it's like to die, what it means to die.
You're so good at finding just that one word that is so loaded. War, freedom,
Right.
tribe. Like, it's just such loaded words. And you pick on that one word and you're like, well, fuck, I got to see what this is about.
Yeah. Well, trust me, I never would have, had this not happened to me. I have 2 young children, and the main trauma of this, and it was extremely traumatic. It was way more traumatic than combat, was that I'd almost left my children. I'm okay with dying. I mean, really, dying's easy. I mean, I realized as I was sort of halfway there, I had one foot in the nether world, right? And it was like, I realized dying is just half step to the left, and there you go. And it's really the simplest thing in the world. What made it way more complicated and painful for me was that the repercussions that it would have had for my 2 little girls. And so I'm a writer, and I want to write about that stuff. And the gift of it was that, in a way that, I mean, I've had a bullet smack next to my forehead into a sandbag. I've had close calls. None of it quite gave me the appreciation for life. And by life, I mean just the fact that you're alive, that this experience did. And what keeps all of us alive is literally the thinnest membranes you can imagine. I mean, it's the thickness of an artery wall. And that, you get a rip in one of those, you're dead in an hour or less. And, I started, within minutes, I couldn't stand up and started going blind. I mean, that thing ripped, and within minutes, forget it. I was done. I couldn't even crawl. And my wife saved my life. So afterwards, when I woke up the next day and I was still alive, and the gift that life is, and I don't mean that in a religious, I'm not religious, but just the gift that you get to be alive, that you get to think, to think and feel and exist, is so staggering. It's such a crazy thing. And that's the gift that incident was. And it came at a huge cost, but I want to write about all of that.
And I think you nailed it. That's exactly what went through my head, because before you have like a real near-death experience, you kind of do wonder like what's going to go through your head. I think that's the human condition, where you wonder what's next. I think that's the reason why people rely on philosophies or religion and things like that, because we don't know. It's the great unknown that no one has any idea, because nobody really comes back, unless you believe the tales of Lazarus and Jesus. Like, nobody comes back from that point of being dead to being alive. When I sat underneath a stairwell in Fallujah after a bullet ripped through my arm, the only thing I thought about was, will I be able to hold my daughter with both arms again? Will she be embarrassed whenever I walk across when she goes to high school graduation? Like, those things are the things that stay with you. And it gives you a different level of appreciation for the rest of your life about what's a big deal, what's not a big deal. And I think that really that is the gift that you're talking about, is that you have the ability to really reframe your mind and think, well, sure, my team lost, but I'm here. Like things that were a big deal no longer are.
Yeah, it's this basic sense of gratitude. And you can have gratitude in a sort of religious or Christian context. And you can also be an atheist. I mean, I'm an atheist, and I'm enormously grateful. My gratitude of being alive and to be able to be a father to my children, my gratitude is bottomless. I mean, it just, there's no end to it. And, parenting's hard, right? I mean, definitely sometimes you're like, stop throwing the Cheerios around whatever, you can get into a frayed, your nerves can get frayed. You can get into a sort of bent place.
Or when your wife is like, Sebastian, you take the trash out, and you're like, I'm doing something right now. Like, oh, well, you wouldn't be here to do that if it wasn't for me.
Right. Yeah, no, exactly. And so now I just think, as you feel that frustration rise in anything, I just think, hey, stop. Like, you almost didn't get to experience any of this. The movie of your life almost ended on June 16th. Like this is all extra. So, do it with a good heart. Like, and it's very, very effective. And I mean, not to sort of like switch horses, but I think it's important for a moment. We are incredibly lucky to live in the United States. I've worked all over the world in most societies that I've worked in, people are terrified of their own military, and terrified of their political leadership. And we live in a democracy. It is the most precious thing in the world. And I feel like one of the things that might actually heal our political wounds, our psychic wounds from the last years of trauma to this country, is if we all figure out, Republicans and Democrats alike, because, you know, I mean, I'm a Democrat, I vote Democratic, but I have huge criticisms of the Democratic Party as well.
Same.
One of the things we all have to do is refine a sense of profound gratitude for the fact that we live in a democracy. You know, Liz Cheney standing up to Donald Trump about the big lie about the stolen election, blah, blah, blah. I mean, I'm a Democrat. I'm never going to vote for Liz Cheney, right? She's a Republican. It works that way. But my God, do I admire her.
Right.
My God, am I grateful to her. And we need, she is experiencing gratitude for the amazing country that she lives in. And she knows how easy it is to destroy it. And she will not let it happen. And God bless her.
The old adage is true. You have a democracy if you can keep it. And it's something that you have to work towards every single day. I think we've wet people whistle about the Pulse book, but don't forget to check out Freedom. It comes out May 14th, correct? Another day?
May 18, yeah. Freedom comes out May 18, yeah.
Make sure you check that out. Do you have any specific spot that you want people to get it from? Like, I know a lot of writers are like, don't get it from Amazon, get it from someplace else. Small bookstores, I imagine.
Oh, yeah. Well, you know, I live in New York City, and my local bookstore is The Strand. Off the top of my head, I don't know what the website is. I'm sure it's really easy to find. The Strand, STRAND. And I would love it, and they would love it if you ordered for them. But, you know, whatever works for you.
There you go. Sebastian, thanks so much. We'll have to have you in the office when I get back up to New York City. We'd love to sit down with you again.
Oh, I would love that. I would love that.
All right.
Good luck with your work.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Have a good day.